Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Maulana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ustad Abu Ayyub here, and welcome back to another episode of Our History. In the 1500s, Constantinople was the great city to be at. If you were thinking of becoming anything during that era, you wanted to be here in the capital of the Ottomans during the reign of the great, mighty Sultan Suleiman, who the Europeans had no choice but, in recognition of his awe, his power, his might, his wealth, called him the Magnificent. As we travel back in time, into this age when masajid were being built to dot the skyline of the city of Constantinople, we will learn today about how great and how truly honorable and just this ruler truly was. Kanuni Sultan Suleiman came into power after the death of his father, after a number of notable victories against such enemies such as the Hungarians, the Habsburgs, the Venetians, and others, including the Safavids. Kanuni Sultan Suleiman was building an empire that would continue to reign for another 400 years after his passing. And in this empire, in this land, and in this city, Constantinople, great individuals rose during the life and times of Kanuni Sultan Suleiman. Among these individuals is none other than the famed grand architect of the Ottomans, Mimar Sinan, who is famous for building the likes of the Suleymaniya and the Selimiya, the two finest, among the finest masjids in all of Ottoman history. Now, Mimar Sinan starts his life off as a lowly conscript, a Christian conscript of their dervishme system. And this system was put into place by the Ottomans as a way to recruit young Christian boys who would later on become either warriors of the sultans, known as the Janissaries, or fulfill higher positions in the government of the Ottomans. And of course, as members of the state, their only allegiance was to the sultan and to the state itself. So they made effective warriors and they made effective statesmen. And because of Mimar Sinan's interest in mathematics, interest in arithmetic, Mimar Sinan was at first sent into the artillery corps. Before long, however, he proved himself during one of Kanuni Sultan Suleiman's Hungarian campaigns, where he built a bridge within 3 days over a location on a river where it was said by many others that nothing could be built here. No bridge would be able to be built here. And yet Mimar Sinan, through his experience and his expertise, he not only builds a bridge, but he allows the entire Ottoman to cross over on this section and win the campaign. This act of Mimar Sinan would later be rewarded by Sultan Suleiman, who then makes Mimar Sinan the grand architect. But what's very interesting here is that Mimar Sinan at this point in time was in his 40s. He was already in his midlife, and yet now he was starting a new career. Now, scholarship also thrives during the reign of Kanuni Sultan Suleiman. Among the most famous of these scholars is none other than the Shaykh al-Islam, Abu Saud Effendi. And Abu Saud Effendi, he leaves behind this incredible work of tafsir, which to this very day is studied in many circles of knowledge by students around the world. His works are studied, his works are disseminated, and he is the one who encouraged Kanuni Sultan Suleiman to start to align the laws of the Ottomans together with the laws of the Quran and the Sharia. Foreigners from throughout the world would be drawn to the court and the capital of the Ottomans. From Genoa, from Venice, from France, Russia, the Hungarians and the Venetians, they would all come here to the capital of Kanuni Sultan Suleiman. And many of these were struck by the sheer beauty of the masjids, of the palaces. And one thing that stood out to them were the beautiful tiles, which came to its peak of production during the reign of Kanuni Sultan Suleiman, which are called Islamic tiles. And these were beautifully made out of white and blue lacquer. And it is this blue color that particularly struck the Europeans, so much so that the French would identify this blue with the Turks. They would call it Turkish or turquoise, which in our language today can be translated into turquoise. Despite all of this luxury, Sultan Suleiman, especially in his later years, shunned much of this. And it is said that he preferred to eat his meals from a wooden bowl with a wooden spoon rather than eating from an opulent plate from China or utensils made of silver or other things. So Sultan Suleiman in his later years, he spent time with his family, and yet power and leadership also comes with many, many sacrifices and many, many struggles. In the case of Kanuni Sultan Suleiman, this strikes him with his children. He has 5 sons. Among these sons, there is one who was his favorite, the one who was meant to become the Sultan after the death of his father. And yet this Sultan, Shahzadeh Muhammad, dies at an early age in his 20s from smallpox. This is then followed by another Shahzadeh, Shahzadeh Murad, who Sultan Suleiman also saw as a potential leader. This was a prince who was loved by the military, loved by the Janissaries, and yet he was caught up in some political intrigue which leads to his death. By the time Sultan Suleiman is on his deathbed, his remaining 3 sons are poised at each other's necks with their own armies, with their own followers and supporters. And as the death of their father nears, one of them comes out on top, and this is Shahzadeh Selim, who was the least likely of all of the 5 brothers to take over after his father. He was known as someone who was a little bit more of a prince who would spend time with his friends, relaxing, doing things, hunting, and other activities, rather than someone who was determined or who was focused in the leadership of the country. And with the changing of the Sultanate after the death of Sultan Suleiman in 1566 to the reign of Selim II, we see that the Ottomans now have reached their pinnacle, have reached their apogee, and are slowly in decline. And within a generation or two, the Ottoman sultans no longer lead their armies into battle. The Ottoman sultans instead, they stay in their palaces, among their women folk, among their children, and allow the reins of government to be taken into the hands of other administrators, such as wazirs and advisors, leading to the ultimate decline and the demise of the Ottomans. And yet, as we know, that it is Allah Azza wa Jal that grants power, and He is the one, subhanahu wa ta'ala, that also takes power away. And so, but within a number of centuries, the Ottomans would be a shadow of their former self. But such is history, our history. Join us for another episode of Our History on Path to Success. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.